Welcome to another interview on Cross-Border Talks. We continue to reflect on the situation in Ukraine and what it means for the region beyond it, as well as for Eastern Europe. Recently, in the beginning of March, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, and Georgia applied for EU membership, and we are now having an interlocutor who has probably a lot to say about all these developments. This is Codru Vrabie. He is a long-standing NGO activist from Romania, involved in a number of initiatives over the years for better governance, anti-corruption expert, etc. And most recently, he has been involved in Konrad Adenauer's program of Leaders in Justice, which led him to make a lot of trainings with young magistrates and jurists from Romania and Moldova. So we'll have a lot to discuss with him. First of all, Codru, what is your take on the situation, what is going on in Ukraine? There was, for a long time, there were various options, but most likely Ukraine was, and all the region was developing in a certain way of coordination, possibly, between the various geopolitical forces. So what is the change now with this Russian intervention?
Difficult question. Complex and difficult from the perspective that it's almost impossible to predict the future in these days. I think Ukraine was definitely on the path to more integration with the European Union, or the West, if you want. And it may be the case that this idea of Ukraine eventually joining NATO was one of the primary concerns for Russia. Now, to what extent Russia's intervention was in any way, shape, or form justified, I don't want to get into that, because I think it's an abuse in international relations. But basically, yes, the people of the Ukraine was, up until the end of February, up until the invasion, the people of the Ukraine was looking at the West with a lot of hope. Now, I think what happened after the Russian war, after the Russian intervention in the Ukraine, is that we see that hope increasing, not only in the Ukraine, but also in the neighboring Moldova, in Georgia, and pretty much all over Eastern Europe, from the Baltic states through Poland, Slovakia, Romania, and possibly Bulgaria as well. I'm not sure what's happening in Hungary, but that's a little bit of a different story. So I don't know if I answered your question specifically.
I understand that the hope for development, not for standing on one place, not for repeating the same thing which disastrous transition has made, the hope was related to West. So let me ask something about that here. We have now a situation in which Ukraine applied for fast-track accession to the EU, and Moldova and Georgia followed suit just a few days after that. We know that there is a war in Ukraine, and also Georgia and Moldova have had their own frozen conflicts. And especially in this situation, Transnistria announced that it may declare independence if the geopolitical position of Moldova changes. So that is one thing, the geopolitical track. But apart from that, there is also the part of relations with the EU, which is a give and take relationship. So what is this application for the EU of the three countries changing for them? What can the EU deliver, and what is realistic given all those frozen and warm conflicts that take place?
You have many questions in one, so it's a bit difficult. But I think we should start from this concept of fast-track accession, which is, to the best of my knowledge, not yet very well defined. We all know that in order for a country to start accession to the European Union, that country needs to satisfy the Copenhagen criteria. And the Copenhagen criteria relate most importantly to the social peace, so to say, within the country. Now, that is not really valid or applicable to the Ukraine, which is involved in a conflict, in a war, actually, not just a conflict. In Georgia, where you have frozen conflicts related to Ossetia and Abkhazia, and in Moldova, because of the Transnistrian so-called republic. So I'm looking at the concept of fast-track accession as something that will need, first of all, clarification from the European Commission, basically from the European Council, because it's a matter of changes, in a sense, to the treaties. So I do not expect that the fast track can start earlier than maybe 6 months to a year. And I do not see the idea of a fast track accession in the priorities of the French presidency. So if that comes in any way, shape, or form on the table, it will probably happen in the second half of this year. And the first steps that we could see in terms of an agreement or a political process can only be next year in the best case scenario. Then after that, provided that we have a new framework for this fast track accession, we'll have the negotiation process. We all remember from the time when Romania and Bulgaria were candidates to the European Union about negotiations regarding specific chapters on, I don't know, statistics, agriculture, justice and home affairs, and so on. Specifically, the Justice and Home Affairs chapter will be very difficult to negotiate for all of these countries. We know that in Georgia, they had a huge process of cleaning up the police about 10 years ago. They are reforming the judiciary. In the Ukraine, they started the reform with the vetting process that was borrowed, so to say, from Albania. And Moldova just started the vetting process for magistrates. Maybe it is ongoing throughout this crisis. So, especially for the chapter on justice and home affairs, it's going to be very difficult when we look at the judiciary, the justice system. And it's going to be very difficult from the perspective of home affairs when we look at the hot war area in eastern Ukraine and in the south. And if you think of the so-called frozen conflicts both in Georgia and in Moldova. So from that perspective, it's going to be extremely difficult to have a fast track accession. And when we mean fast track, we mean basically at least 3 years down the road. I cannot see it happening faster than that.
In any case, you are a witness to a number of efforts, especially in the Republic of Moldova, for modernization of the country. We are aware that Moldova has had some successes in electronic government, let's say, and you are on your own making trainings and being in contact with its young generation of jurists and magistrates. So can you tell us more about these efforts, especially of the Republic of Moldova for modernization? To what extent they have been a success? To what extent there is even more to be done? What are the obstacles?
I travel to Moldova at least once a year, but usually twice a year. And I do have contacts with mostly with the young professionals in the justice system. I think the current situation with the invasion, with the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, brings both fear and hope to Moldova. Fear because everybody is thinking of the worst case scenario where Odessa may be occupied by the Russians, and then they could create a corridor from Odessa to Transnistria, where we do have the 14th Russian army stationed there for the past, 30 years. So that would mean a sort of a big Novorossiya kind of new state right on the border with Moldova. That's the fear part. At the same time, there is hope. And the hope is translated in how Moldova is dealing with the wave of refugees from the Ukraine. If I'm not mistaken, about 100,000 people already crossed the border into Moldova. Not all of them stay. Some of them cross over into Romania and go all the way into Western Europe. But the way the Moldovan people manages the situation with the refugees is exemplary. And it allows the Moldovan people to take pride in the fact that they are developed enough to be able to host the refugees and provide them with, I don't know, shelter, food, emergency medical assistance, and so on. That means, in a sense, that the economic development of the Republic of Moldova, that was quite accelerated in the past 10 years, now has a very specific and very clear illustration on the ground. The people of Moldova realize that even though they are poor, they have a better standard of living today than 10 years ago. And so they can afford so-called the luxury of catering to the needs of the refugees from Ukraine. That is huge in terms of the internal motivation for hope and for courage. If we take a look from the judiciary, we have seen that the new Moldovan government came in with a lot of hopes, with a lot of promises. Then it stumbled on a number of policy decisions related to the judiciary. But right now we are in the process of seeing the vetting of the candidates for the Supreme Court and for the Judicial Council and for the prosecutorial council as well. And that process seems to go, very well streamlined, smooth, or it may be the case that because of the refugee crisis, people are not paying too much attention. But I doubt that. So basically, we are in a process where the Moldovan judiciary is, in a sense, stepping up to a new level of development where they hope for the entire society that they can become a model of judicial reform in Eastern Europe. And if they succeed with this judicial reform, just as they succeeded in the past 10 years with e-governance, then this is an extremely well development and an extremely good direction for development. Indeed, you are right, the e-government of Moldova, in terms of e-services, is a lot better than what we have in Romania or in Bulgaria. And it's a model to which we can only aspire. So,
okay, so there is hope. And if we take the three countries all together, what is the positive theory about their development in these specific conditions when, as I said, there is a war in Ukraine and there are frozen conflicts in the other two? So what can really be the positive story about their development from now on?
Look, the most important positive story is that these three countries right now are defending our freedom to talk to each other as we do. I mean, right this very moment, it's peace in Bucharest, it's peace in Ruse. We can get online and record this material. This is possible because of Ukraine, to begin with, because of Georgia, because Georgia stepped up and confronted Russia several years ago, and because Moldova is an excellent buffer to absorb the first wave of Ukrainian refugees. So their capacity for self-sacrifice, if I can use that expression, is already the positive story that we can all look at and then later on reward with membership in the European Union. If that is something that they really want to do, and if it's something that they can do. But I have hopes that this will happen, and one day the European Union will include not only these three countries, but also the Western Balkans, hopefully Belarus, unless Belarus decides to become the 16th Republic of the Russian Federation, but that's their own idea. And I'm also looking with a lot of hope at Armenia, because I think Armenia is also part of the European heritage and should become part of the European Union at a later point. With Azerbaijan, it is a little bit more complicated in the sense that similar to how Turkey is complicated in relation to the European Union. But, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
I was thinking my final question to be about Romania's role in what is going on in the East, but the way you describe the positive story about these three countries makes me ask, what can the EU, or if you wish, our region, the eastern part of the EU, do or should do to support the positive story as you defined it in these three countries?
I'll look at Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria because I think these are probably the most important actors right now. With Hungary, unfortunately, it's difficult to discuss the topic because Viktor Orban in Hungary still plays a sort of an ambiguous card. And in a sense, that may be understandable because April is the month of elections in Hungary. So it's difficult for now to discuss Hungary. I don't know much about Slovakia, but Poland clearly is helping with the refugees. If I'm not mistaken, about 500,000 people went from the Ukraine into Poland, and Poland is helping on that particular front a lot. Again, Romania is helping with the refugees, Bulgaria is helping with the refugees. It's an interesting story that some of the Ukrainian refugees who cannot go all the way up to Poland, but found refuge in Romania, they said that it's difficult for them to remain in Romania because they don't understand the alphabet and they don't understand the language and they find it very difficult to get around. And so they prefer to be relocated to Bulgaria. They have this notion that maybe it's easier for them in Bulgaria. And I already know about a bus of people that went all the way from the northern border with the Ukraine down to Bucharest and into Bulgaria with about 40 or 50 Ukrainian refugees, specifically on this reason. So the first type of help is helping with the refugees. The European Union already adopted the directive for temporary protection. Romania has not yet transposed it. Bulgaria did. Poland did. So we're waiting for the Romanian government to adopt a decision that will help implement the European directive for temporary protection, because this is better than the status of asylum, and it's better than the status of tourist. So we'll see how that goes. But then later on, starting in April, I think Poland and Romania and Bulgaria will hopefully cooperate with each other in a way that they can support the Ukrainians at home. There's been some talks about the aid corridors that can be open to send in medicine, drugs, food, I don't know, blankets, a lot of stuff that is needed on the ground. And then, other than that, we can look at how Romania, Bulgaria, and Poland, possibly even Slovakia in this sense, cooperate inside the European Council to push European aid for reconstruction and development into the Ukraine, into Moldova, and then maybe also across the sea into Georgia. But I think that the Ukraine and Moldova are the top priority, because they have also been the most affected by the war. So I think this is the key for the very near future, for April and May, pushing for aid for reconstruction and development into the Ukraine and into Moldova. And fortunately, we do have governments on the ground, both in the Ukraine and in Moldova, that are European-minded. And that will make the cooperation with these two governments very smooth and hopefully effective.
If you allow me, just in short, to ask you to what extent a military involvement in this situation on this part of this eastern flank of EU is justified, in your view?
It can be morally justified, but politically, that would be suicide. So from this perspective, I think that the only military aid that could go into the Ukraine on the ground, sort of as blue helmets under the UN aegis, can be from some of the countries that are neutral. Because Finland and Sweden already started some kind of political talks with NATO, I think they can no longer serve that purpose. The only European Union country that can still do that, I think, is Austria. And then, of course, a lot of people will say that Austria cannot be an honest broker because the state company OMV has oil interests in relation to Russia. It's a very complicated situation, and I think military aid will not be going to the Ukraine from any of the European countries in the very near future, simply because of that complication with NATO. And so we'll sit and wait, and we'll see who else from around the globe can help in this situation. Maybe India would be an interesting partner in this effort.
Okay, Kodru, thank you very much for stating your opinions on all those issues, and let's hope for the best.
Peace.